Hello, esteemed audience, and welcome to another episode of Middle Grade Ninja. I'm Rob Kent. As you know, I'm the author of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees, Banneker Bones and the Alligator People, and the yet to be revealed third Banneker Bones adventure, which I was working on this morning, about 30 minutes ago before we started recording here. It's going well. I'm very excited for you to see it, and that will hopefully be early 2020. So look forward to that. In the meantime, you can get your hands on Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees as a paperback, an audiobook, and the ebook is free to download whenever you're watching or listening to this, wherever fine ebooks are sold. So if you watch or listen to the show regularly, you've heard me talk about writing, you've got to be curious, can I actually do it? You can find out for free. Go download your free copy of Banneker Bones. If you prefer horror, under the super secret pen name Robert Kent, I write horror novels such as the young adult novel All Together Now a Zombie Story, All Right Now a short zombie story, a fun tale called Pizza Delivery, which never fails to shock and delight. And then the Book of David, which is a 5-volume serial horror novel in the style of Stephen King. It is absolutely bonkers. I have no business mentioning it here on the Middle Grade Ninja podcast every episode, and yet I do. It's 5 volumes long. There's an omnibus with all 5 chapters. If you're curious about that one, you can get it in paperback, and the ebook for chapter 1 is free to download. So you can get chapter 1 once you're hooked. Come see me with money for chapters 2, 3, 4, and 5. And just see how crazy that thing goes, how far we're going to fall down the horror rabbit hole. That's the Book of David by Robert Kent. Coming up here on the Middle Grade Ninja podcast on Friday of this week, we're going to be chatting with author Alan Woodrow about his new book, Curse of the Werepenguin, which I absolutely love. Next week, we'll be have our first ever return guest. My friend and yours, Laura Martin, will come back to tell us about her new book, Hoax for Hire. And then we'll be talking with authors Sharon M. Draper and Dan Gutman. So stick with me, esteemed audience. We've got some amazing shows lined up, as always. If you want to see what's coming up at the podcast, what's going on with me, you can find out more at middlegradeninja.com. Today's guest, I couldn't be more excited. We're going to be chatting with author Kate Hannigan. Kate, how are you today?
I'm good. Thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Well, thank you so very much for making the time in your schedule and for being here today. If you would, just start things off by telling esteemed audience a little bit about your background and how you've gone from wanting to be a writer to the Kate Hannigan.
Hello, esteemed audience. Thanks for tuning in. So the long story and the short story all jammed into one, love words. As a kid, I remember 3rd grade, teacher putting a new word on the chalkboard and just being kind of a word nerd, adding new words into the arsenal and impressing my parents. I remember the word ambidextrous going up in 3rd grade. So translating that into just doing journalism in high school and deciding to do it in college, and then just always wanting to be around stories and storytelling and storytellers. And then after leaving journalism, I didn't want to walk away from words. And then I started having kids, and I just, every night reading the books with them, I just decided to just monkey around and see what I could do. And I produced many years of just awful things. But, the love was there, the love of words, the love of stories. I knew books that I liked. I didn't know why I liked them, like what was going on in those books that made me, glom onto them. But I just kept at it. And maybe that's like a trait that all writers have to have, is like just obnoxious persistence, just banging my head against the wall until finally something hit. And I hit with an agent who then sold everything, not everything, but, everything that I have sold has come through her great work. So I just, kept writing and stuff. But it was like an 8-year ramp up. So esteemed audience, keep at it. Don't give up.
Oh, I'm sure there are plenty of members of esteemed audience right now thinking 8 years. That sounds like a mercifully short period of time.
Oh, mercifully short. It runs the gamut. I was on a debut authors panel, and I sat next to somebody that I'd love to say the name of this author, but couldn't have been nicer. And she's like, yeah, this is my first book. And, I wrote it because my kid was really interested in this thing. I wrote it, looked up a couple publishing houses that sounded all right, sold it, and it went on to the New York Times bestseller list. And I was like, hey, that's not a normal story.
So it's a skull clap Academy Award smile. I'm so
I
happy
know.
you won. It's an honor to be nominated.
Super nice person, but I was just like on this panel, like all the rest of us were like, yeah, that's not usually how it goes. It's usually like years of banging your head against the wall until finally, something clicks. Everybody's on a different learning curve in life, right? I am slow and methodical, and it just takes me a little while. I'm like a snowplow. So it took me a little while to get the hang of things and understand. And I don't even know if I understand now, but I'm going with it.
What was it that during those hard times, you said it's 8 years, and the first few years you weren't writing anything that was publishable. I'm assuming you didn't know that at the time, that it seemed wonderful to you until it was only retrospect that showed the obviousness that you could do better, and you did. So what was it that kept you going through those difficult times, and that might keep somebody who's listening, who's going through that now?
A couple things. Number one, I think, is wanting it enough. I wanted this, and I could. And another thing is visualizing. I'm a big visualizer. I just pictured, what do I want to do in 5 years? What do I want to do in 10 years? I want to be writing. I get a lot out of writing. For lots of people, I have 3 kids, and 2 of them, writing is excruciating. It's not anything they want to do. But for me, it gets me out of bed in the morning. Sometimes, 4 and 5 in the morning if I'm like on a big project. You got to find that thing in life, right? So wanting it enough and visualizing it happening and just believing that, okay, that is where I'm going. That is the fixed point that I'm going to keep my eyes on, like the way a dancer with all those spins keeps a fixed point. Just keep your eyes on the prize and keep at it. And then I guess just that obnoxious stubbornness that has to come with it too. Like, I'm going to do this. And even though I'm writing crap, if I can say that, even if what I'm writing is not publishable, it's getting me somewhere. And I always tell my kids, like, life is Legos. You need like a foundation that's going to keep it from falling over. And so everything you write is just building on that foundation and getting it a little more sturdy and a little more sturdy, so that as you go up, you're grounded in something. You've got a strong foundation. So
that was a great metaphor. And yes, you are welcome to say things as provocative as crap, darn, dang, sky's the limit. Go nuts.
All right.
Oh, my stars. Ooh, we got to put that one in there.
Crikey.
Well, no, that's a little too far.
Tone it down.
This isn't Ninja After Dark, madam. So when you were visualizing, was it visualizing practical things, or did you start with the J.K. Rowling qualm that I'm going to get, or not qualm from Jerry Maguire, the quan, that's when you get everything, or the awards, the movies, everything you possibly want? Did you start there, or what did you visualize when you were visualizing?
And I'm not even there yet. Like, I can't even, I can't even imagine. Like, I've ridden the rides at Universal that come from Harry Potter. I've been to Hogwarts, the Harry Potter land or whatever. That's crazy talk, to think that something you write could turn into, that. Butterbeer for everybody. But I did visualize, like, well, number one, not bringing shame upon the family, that I would get to a point where, the family wouldn't
be sure
to say, oh yeah, that's mom, or, family, sister, daughter, wife, whatever. But yeah, I just visualized, like, what do I want to do? I want to write. I want to talk to kids about books. I want to talk to kids about the ideas behind books. I wouldn't mind walking into a bookstore and pointing at something on the shelf. I wanted it, and I just focused on it, and I just did whatever needed to be done, without like selling a kidney or a child, but whatever needed to be done, backside in chair, just write. And everything we do is fodder, is material for later in life. So over those 8 years of writing and not getting anywhere, and I started when rejection letters came in the mail, and you tore open the envelope and had this insulting piece of paper. So I saved all those because everything's fodder and material for something else. So once I finally, the magic moment happened and I sold a novel, I looked across the room and there's that stack that for some reason I'd been holding on to. I was like, I think I can do something with that. So I walked over to Office Depot in my neighborhood, taped all those letters end to end, and gave them to the guy. And I said to the guy behind near the lamination machine, and I said, "How much can that thing take?" And he goes, "What do you got?" And I said, 65 feet. And he said, "Come back tomorrow." And I left him my 65 feet of rejection letters taped end to end. He laminated them, and now I call it the Scroll of Doom. And I bring it on school visits to show kids, like, don't give up. You know, this is what resilience, persistence, grit, this is what it looks like. And I dramatically unfurl it, and it usually goes down like whatever the middle aisle is during our talk and out the door. I usually have a kid open the door and it goes out the door into the hallway. Like, it's, you know, and those letters are mean. And then I have the kids look at the letters. It says, "Dear author." You know, I didn't even get a name. The most insulting letter had 7 reasons for rejection, and then they just like ticked a box. So anyway, so everything's fodder, everything's material. But if you want it badly enough, you know, in life, if you want anything badly enough, you just start trying to figure out how to do it. So going to conferences and immersing yourself in the world, hearing other people's journeys, and then assessing what works for you, immersing yourself in the writing, like, you know, watching a podcast and hearing what people have to say, and reading, like reading ones that you think work or don't work, and then start asking, well, why does that work or not work? And then reading other things. Like I try to read everything, adult fiction, nonfiction, kid stuff, menus, you know, anything. So am I yammering?
Wonderful visual metaphor. I'm just thinking, if you want to go grab that scroll now that we're on the air for all to hear and see, if you wanted to start reading off those names and let them know that award-winning author Kate Hannigan was not stopped.
I can take my revenge.
I think that's more of a lifetime achievement award speech. Like, you've given this to me now. It's yeah, take it back. So, so many questions to ask you about that. So when, let me start with, because you did have the experience of being a professional journalist coming into this. So, you know, writing wasn't unknown to you, sitting down and meeting a deadline. You didn't have to do the thing where today I just focus on not getting out of my chair for an hour and focus on putting some words on the page. You already had that going for you, right? Right. What did your career as a journalist bring to your writing, and what does it continue to bring?
Well, you know, it could be, what did working in a newsroom do for the writing and for raising children? And the number one thing is the ability to block out persistent chatter. So no, I'm kidding. I listen to my children. But when I was in a newsroom, there's really no room to be, you know, fussy. You just have to sit down and do your job and turn it in. And generally the next day, you know, your amazing headline or the editing or the writing or whatever you've done, the page layout, it's there. So it's an immediate reward. And you just, you know, it's kind of like nose to the grindstone and you go. And so I do feel like maybe that carried over into the writing. Like I could just sit at my laptop and just go and plow. I think because of those days, like it's just a matter of discipline. You know, don't let yourself get distracted. Put the phone away. Turn off all the little beepy things. And like I have a pretty big family, and I have an in-law family that's pretty big, and I have 3 kids. I will respond to my kids, but for the most part, I don't take phone calls. I have friends, you know, who want to chat, and I don't do it during writing time. You just have to put up your barriers and kind of be a little selfish and just say, this is the time, I've got to do this. And if you're writing full time, I mean, I know lots of people who have the 9 to 5 and then write in those stolen hours, which I have so much respect for that. I'm right now getting to write full time, and it is, I recognize how lucky I am for that. So, you know, I have to treat it like a full-time job, which means, you know, I can't, you know, I have to say no to things because it is writing time, and it is, you know, as if I'm on the clock. And so, you know, that's definitely a thing that you have to do, I think. But as far as journalism, I would say it's the ability to just kind of tell myself, suck it up, crybaby, and just sit down and write, you know, because stuff's got to get done, you know. And I feel like, as with anything, you kind of have this window of productivity, and you have this window of, you know, like the minute I sold my first book, I started working on the next book, so that if anybody were to come back and say, got anything else? I could say, sure, here I do. So even right now, I'm on a series, and I just this morning in the shower doing the whole hair, I was thinking, what can I pitch them when I turn in the last manuscript? I need to have something kind of in the queue. So I'm, trying to always think of how to stay relevant. But I think if you want to do it, getting back to how much you want something, it's backside in chair and a little bit of treating it like it's your career and not like a hobby.
Makes sense to me. I've gone a little bit too, I feel, I've got a little bit too hard on myself at times, where I've been, working for 8-10 hours straight, and I haven't got out of the house, and I'm looking pale like a vampire because I haven't seen the sun for a while. Right. And my wife says, are we still married? Is this, are we talking? So I've gone through that day. On the other hand, I think of I've been teaching some local classes. I do a speaking event every year, and this will be the 4th or 5th year I'm doing it. So knock on wood. Hope they keep inviting me back. But I've got some students that come every year, and I ask them, "How's your writing year been? What have you been up to?" And they're like, "Well, I've tried a couple of things. I can't get inspired." And those are the people I want to yell at and say, "No, you listen to Kate Hannigan. Suck it up, babe. You get to work." That's not going to work.
I know exactly what you mean, because sometimes I've gotten to do, talks with other authors, and somebody will say, "Yeah, I've got 4 different projects. I like them all," and they'll tell me a little bit about them, and they sound awesome. And I'll say, "Well, which one's complete?" "None." And I'm like, here's my quotable printed on a T-shirt. Kate Hannigan, observation of life. You don't have a thing until you have a thing. So, if you don't have a finished manuscript, you don't have a thing yet. And it's really hard to revise something that is unfinished. I was lucky enough some years back to hear Richard Peck, and he talked about writing all the way through. And, he was old school. He would type his stuff on his typewriter. And he said he would finish the draft, pull out the last page, put it down, flip the manuscript over, take chapter 1 and throw it out, and redo chapter 1, because chapter 1 is the ending in disguise. So the idea that you don't know where you're going until you get there, and then you can go back through and repurpose so that there's like a new, you can lay in all those start the threads, lay in the things where there's the great payoff at the end. So, I just really feel like for anybody out there, if you're working on a project, finish it. Turn off your editor brain, do the brain dump, just back it up, beep, 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 dump everything out, and then you've got a thing. And then once you have the thing, I realize after all these years that writing is mostly revision. Get it out of your head and then revise, So you don't have a thing until you have a thing.
I will put one little caveat on that, because I have just in the course of going along to get along, I suppose, because you do meet people that just like to show up to writer events. They just like to be there. It's fun for them. They're groupies for music, but for books, and we love those people.
Sure.
Please come to conferences. Please drive down the ticket cost for the rest of us. God bless you. Take up the space. It's fine. And so if I see them 3 or 4 years and they're telling me about the story idea that they've had all along, and they just like having the idea and being able to recite it, that is the thing. And you know what? Fair enough. You go with God. You could be into so many things that aren't great, and you're into books. God bless you. So long as you keep reading and buying books, we don't have a problem. But I'm assuming that those aren't the people that are listening to this show. So let's talk a little bit of specifics. What does the Kate Hannigan making a thing schedule look like when you're writing? What does your day look like? What times are you blocking out? And how much? What's a good day look like where you've produced enough that you can rest easy?
Yeah. Okay, so mostly during the school year. So just looking at the calendar, summer, I tell myself I'm going to get a lot done, but I have 3 kids whom I love. I like their company. So I find it very difficult to be productive when they're home. I mean, now they're all 3 teenagers, so there's a lot of coming and going, so I do have my time. But as far as maximum productivity, I can cook starting like the day after Labor Day when school starts, all the way through, till June. And usually I get up, get people out the door, make lunches, all that good stuff, and then take a walk because I had sciatica from so much sitting. Because it's you and your laptop. So a couple years ago, that was a very painful thing. So I'm a walker, and walking's great for like plotting and dialogue and just sorting out all the tangles in your head with all the writing.
Walk first before you put anything on paper?
I walk first because it's a great time to kind of just get myself mentally prepared. And then I come back and often don't bathe, just jump onto the laptop and go. And on good days, man, I do not get up again until I have to go pick a kid up at 3 or 4 or 5, which is how I feel like I've been able to do the recent novels, because I think novel writing, I mean, any creativity you're doing takes time. Like my sister does accounting, and not to compare one endeavor versus the other, but with math and with some things you do in life, it's charts and columns and you just go. With creativity, it's not a light switch you can turn on and off. You have to kind of build toward a creative stretch and give yourself mental space, physical space to just kind of like think about things and then go and process. So there's like a ramp up there. So I try to give a lot of hours to it. I know I've read about people, everybody has their different creative process. I have read about people who do 1,000 words a day or 2,000, or they'll write for 3 hours and that's it. Anything beyond that taxes them. I am not that way. I am probably unhealthy in that I'll just like slog like Godzilla through as many chapters as I can get, do that brain dump, and then come back to it and then make sure that those things that you plant at the beginning show up, that you give the payoff at the end, which requires constantly going through your 40,000 or 60,000 words. So, and then I do it until I can't take it anymore. And then that's when I know it's time to turn it into somebody. So creative process for me is as many hours as I can get, 5 days a week, weekends off, because I have people that I need to interact with and a dog. And then walks, lots of walks, sometimes 2 a day, depending on what I'm trying to sort out.
Well, I know that I've always said that if I ever had 2 authors come on and they both tell me identical stories, that they do everything the exact same way and they write identical things and they get identical results from their writing, that's the last podcast. I'm done. I don't need to talk to anybody else. I'm going to do what those folks are doing.
Everybody has their way. Mine, I think, is really ugly. There's that, Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott. It's a great, figuring out life, figuring out writing book to read. But there's this chapter called The Shitty First Draft. And in it, she talks about how she's so afraid that she's going to get in a car accident and then somebody's going to come into her office and see how terrible her first draft is. I kind of live that way. So I get the first draft out and then I quickly try to get it in better shape just in case I'm hit by a car and somebody's going to come read what I wrote. But I feel like it's an ugly process from my perspective, but maybe every other author is hiding the same ugly process. Their own.
We have surpassed Crikey. Goodbye. Do you have particular rituals that you need to do? Do you have to have your cup of coffee after your walk? Do you play a certain song to get you in the mood? How do you get that? I always refer to it as almost like a self-hypnosis to get to that place where you can get the story out. What gets you there?
I'm pretty superstitious. Like I have a drink, usually coffee, but I already had my coffee today. I didn't want to be too twitchy, but I have ice water. I usually arrange everything in a particular way. And then I don't talk about certain things. It's just like, if you're pregnant with a baby and you don't want to talk about the name of the baby until the baby arrives or whatever. I try not to disclose too much about what I'm writing about just because I get superstitious about things. And I never, ever end a writing day with a completed chapter because I'm just afraid of writer's block. I'm afraid that if it's a tidy end of chapter, I'm just going to sit down the next day and go, well, I don't know where to go. So I almost always end middle of a chapter, mid-thought, so that I can sit back down, read where I was, and then go again. And that's a pretty big superstition with me. I'm a little weird that way. Pretty
jumping ahead a little bit, because I've been stalking you online, and I know that you are an ardent plotter as opposed to a pantser, and a lot of times you're writing historical fiction. So there's certainly a precedent that you have to follow to some degree. Does that still put you in a position where you feel like you need to leave the chapter unfinished or start a new chapter before you end the writing day?
Yeah.
I guess I'm just curious why that doesn't counterbalance by the outline.
It was funny when I first joined a critique group. Everybody in the critique group were pantsers, and they liked that sort of wind in the hair thrill of just seeing where the characters took them. And I was like, okay, I can do this. And then I realized I wasn't getting anywhere. And the more I thought about it, I was like, if I'm going on a bike ride, I tend to know where I'm going and where I'm going to come, where I'm going to end. So I realized that I was a plotter. And so even though there's a lot of historical stuff in my books, I still have to figure out my own route with it. And that's something I wrestle with. And, maybe we'll get to this later in the discussion, but, the history and the fiction, how much is mine and how much do I need to honor history? So how much is sort of already laid out for me and how much do I get to bring to it? So, I still am a plotter, and I still, don't always, feel comfortable with leaving, with being too like I'm afraid I'm going to lose the thread, so that's why I try to have my little devices to bring me back to the moment as I get through it, because I don't feel like it's all laid out for me, even though it's historical stuff.
Makes perfect sense to me. Yeah, we're gonna talk about so much. I have plans for us to talk about everything. Who knows what we'll get to, but I want to get to everything. One more question about you. Two more questions about you as an author, and then let's start talking about Kate, because in discussing, I think, your books, we can break down a little bit of your process and how you came to each one with specific examples. Sure. But I wanted to ask you, since we've been talking about your 8-year journey and putting in the time and saying, suck it up, Kate, and getting in there, how did you come to meet our previous guest, Jennifer Matson? How did you hook up with her as a literary agent, your ambassador to Kwan, who's now taking you on to greatness?
So, okay. I've told the story a few times at author things. So, when you're writing and you've got your manuscript, you feel like, okay, it's ready to kind of show the world. I want to get an agent, and everybody has a different story. And, looking on lists and looking in the back of books that you've admired where you see the agent get credited. My story comes back to 2 simple words: play nice. Play nice in life. So I used to work in a newspaper in Monterey County, California, and I was a wee 20-something, like 22, whatever you are, right when you get out of college and get your first job. So I'm like 22 or so. And in comes a 16-year-old who is the teen voice on the op-ed page. And then she did she did some writing, she did some sort of filing. She just was a teenager working, 16, working in between high school and ballet class. And her name was Jennifer Matson. And fast forward 100 years to Chicago, SCBWI, which I highly recommend if people aren't in SCBWI. We can come back to that later, but great organization for all the information. All the questions you have about starting out can be answered. So boom, I see Jennifer Matson's name zip across my screen, and I'm like, mental Rolodex. Wait, why is that name so familiar? And I'm like, wait a minute, is that the wispy 16-year-old who was the teen voice? And so I messaged her, and she's like, yes, let's have dinner. So she's an agent for Andrea Brown Literary, and she's basically the Chicago office, and I live in Chicago. So we get dinner. Through the whole meal, all I'm thinking is, was 22-year-old me nice to 16-year-old her? And thank God, at the end of the meal, she goes, yeah, one time you told me I had good fashion sense. And I was like, yes, I played nice. And then right as we were ending, she said, hey, have you got anything? And I said, I do. And I just happened to finish the manuscript to what became my first book. And so she said, send it to me. And then she took me on as a client and sold it to Disney Hyperion. And that launched our journey together. And so she's still my agent. So anything I have sold, Jennifer sold it for me.
And so that's after that long laminated roll tape with 65 feet of rejections.
Yes. Yeah. So I started in the early aughts with SCBWI. I remember recently I looked up at the first state conference they had. SCBWI is a national and international group it's a very clunky acronym for Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. So it's a great clearinghouse for if your question is, I'm doing a picture book, do I do the pictures? They will tell you no. And there's all sorts of, it's a wealth of information on everything. And I think I went to our state conference like in 2003 or something like that. And Jennifer sold, I think she sold Cupcake Cousins 1 to Disney in 2011 or 12. So yeah, something like that. So it was a journey. But so everybody's going to have their different story of how they connect with an agent, how they meet them. But I think mine just comes down to, thank God, 22-year-old me was nice. But this world, this little tiny children's book world is like microscopic. And so be nice to people because, your neighbor who, doesn't clean up their yard might sell a book and then say to you, hey, I have a great agent or an editor, show me your manuscript. They could be, not that everything is transactional, but, at some point you're going to need your book blurbed. If you've been a jerk to the world, nobody's going to blurb your book. Nobody's going to talk to you about your book because you're a jerk, So,
whenever you say that, but I know some jerks with great blurbs.
Okay, so there's always the outliers, but for the most part, I think just as a life policy, just be nice to people. And, if you're good to the universe, I believe the universe will be good back, So, but Jennifer I cherish our relationship because we're kind of the yin yang of things. I'm always like, hey, look, a shiny thing. And she's always like, come back to the table, sit down. So she's great.
So you guys have been together how long now?
Whatever that is. I guess 7 years. Feels like longer, but yeah, I guess 7 years. I haven't thought about that, but yeah, I should look up in my calendar when we went to a meal together. But I think I signed a contract with Disney in 2012 and it came out in 2014. So I was working with her in 12 and it's 19. So yeah, 7 years. So.
Send her a lovely arrangement. Happy anniversary. Oh, Jennifer.
I sent her here. I got some swag for Kate. I made just a canvas tote, which I'm sure anyone in the industry has about 100 canvas tote bags with a book on it. But I made her a little book swag and sent it to her. I should probably have done, flowers or a bouquet of balloons, but she gets book swag from me.
She probably cherishes that canvas bag. She probably sleeps with it right next to her pillow every night. Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Well, the thing that's good about her, and as people, just speaking to the agenting thing, if you're shopping for an agent and you're trying to figure out who to go with, it's an important relationship. And I will say, like, one of the things that makes me feel really good about Jennifer is she makes me feel like I'm her only client. And I have to remind myself that she doesn't need a bunch of emails from me, chit-chatty. Like, she has other people she's dealing with. She has a lot of people. But coming back, like, she makes me feel like I'm her only client. So she's really good. And I think as a life policy, other than play nice, is go to the love. And if you have somebody that's willing to give you a lot of attention, respond to your emails, communicate with you, those are all the things that you really want in an agent. And as you're shopping around, if you're not getting that from your agent, you should think about the relationship and what you want. But yeah, she's great.
Let's one more question about author resources, and then we'll talk CAPE.
Yeah.
I definitely have some CAPE questions for you.
Okay.
But let's talk about Author Of, because I think that's a tremendous resource that anybody listening or watching could go and check out right now. So what is Author Of?
Okay, so I'm just a nosy person. Like, when I talk to kids and kids are like, why did you go into writing? Why did you go into newspapers? What's wrong with you? Those little questions kids ask. I think one of the reasons I went into writing, other than being like a total word nerd and liking words and liking stories, was that I was really nosy and kind of, Well, just nosy. Like I think about, what would make a good spy. I was a good eavesdropper. I liked writing notes and being sneaky, so all those things. So when I think about like adding spies to my book, which I'm doing right now on some other projects, just being a nosy kid really helped shape who I am today. So with author
that plays into your career as a journalist as well, correct?
Yeah, just being nosy, like, why is that? Why? So, as I started writing and I try to read tons of other people's stuff and I think, wow, how did that person come up? Why did they write that? How did they do that research? Because I also, aside from doing middle grade novels, I also do like picture book biographies and some nonfiction picture books. So I'm just curious about people. So I've just decided, like, just to message somebody. I just started a blog just to ask other authors and artists what about their creative process, kind of just like you. Tell me about your creative process. Why did you do this? Why did you want to write about this person? So it just grew out of that big nosy me. And I think it's great. I think kids should be encouraged to be nosy and inquisitive. And that's what learning is all about, right? So Author Of is just me contacting authors, cold calling them basically and saying, if I send you some questions, do you think you could get to them? And they're almost always like, absolutely. So it just kind of grew out of that. So I hope people read it just out of the same curiosity that I have. Like, why did you do that?
Can authors who are listening, who are desperate for promotion, can they reach out to you and
you betcha. Yeah, happy to. I get that all the time, and I'm happy to. So
and you
fun.
come up with individual questions for every person that you come into contact with?
Yeah, I mean, I try to be familiar with their work and kind of like look into the work and figure, and ask them, specifics about, the characters or the subject they researched or what that was like to track down some of that stuff. So, yeah.
I see. That's where I've gone wrong with this podcast. Is now I have to read everybody's book and do lots of research and have information about them coming in, so I can talk intelligently about who they are. Whereas back at the blog, I ask everybody the same 7 questions. Oh, I'd never had a better idea, because I never got the same answer twice, which is I've always been thrilled and a little bit taken aback that actually worked. I've always felt a little like what's his name? Not Mark Twain, Tom Sawyer, with the picket fence. Oh, what fun it is to whitewash this fence. Would you like to come and write my blog content for me? Oh, wonderful.
No, I know what you mean, though. It's like, hey, I know you're really busy, but here's 5 questions. Could you get to them for me and write them out soon? So it is a little bit like, but I think people are happy to share their story, especially with an audience of other writers, of kindred souls. So.
And because I've been there, I know that there's information about you and links to your books and all that good stuff. And I'm sure that people that come there do go and check you out. And so it's good for promotion that way. But I've got to assume that this is time you're spending. That's kind of one of your ways that you're giving back to the author community. Yeah.
I think so. I mean, I hope so. I hope people find it worthwhile, in the same spirit of, all right, I'm trying to figure out how to do something. If I read about this person's creative process, maybe that's something that'll work for me. I mean, I'm the type of person that, those videos now on how to cook and like the camera's right above the pan and it just shows somebody dumping oil in and dumping in a little garlic and then whoosh. I have to see how it's done. Like I'm one of those learners that I'm just a hot mess, but if I can see how somebody else did it, I can look at that and then mess around and figure out my own trajectory. But I do better, kind of like I like conferences because I like listening to how other people did it. And I don't, necessarily their route isn't necessarily what I should be doing, but it's good to see it, try it, and find my own way.
We are kindred spirits. That's exactly what I'm hoping to do. And nobody has given me the answer yet, but lots of people have given me lots of little answers that have really helped out along the way.
Then you find your way. Right. Exactly.
Number one consumer of the blog and this podcast has always been me. Nobody gets more benefit than me. I'm really happy that other people get some benefit. Good for them. But
I know what you mean. Right. It's like
soaking up the information so I can hopefully be a better writer.
Right. Like, I'm going to ponder this.
Well, let's talk about Kate. So if you would, because again, I'm terrible about summarizing other people's books. I've tried it before, and then people just kind of stare at me and say, "That's not what my book is about at all. Did you read it?" So if you would, please tell esteemed audience about Kate.
Okay, sure. So Kate is about 3 girls who are all puzzle masters, and it's set during World War II, and they all want to do something for the war effort. So they try out at a puzzle test, and they are rejected. And not that they're bad, but just because they're girls, their submissions are just tossed aside. And so they are upset by this, but at the same time, they are plucked to a different group that is part of this top secret war effort. So things start to unfold. Oh, and at the same time, they're all 3, they don't know each other, but they've just met. But the thing that ties them together is they're all 3 comic book obsessed. And so comic books were hugely popular during World War II. So they transform into superheroes and have their own, all they want to do is help during the war. And so anyway, they transform, they get superpowers, and so they do their part fighting in the war. And as they're fighting, it's a 3-book series. In each book, they're interacting with real historical women from World War II who were doing basically super heroic things. So in book 1, it's the ENIAC programmers of the first, modern electric computer was the ENIAC, and it was built during World War II. So that computer launched the modern age that we live in now. Like all of our, the laptops we're on or whatever traces the DNA to the ENIAC. These 6 women were mathematicians that were pulled in to be human computers. They called computers this room full of women that were doing ballistic calculations during World War II. These mathematicians were hired right out of college because all the men went overseas. So all these female mathematicians had their moment. 6 of them got pulled aside for this project that became the building of the first computer, the modern computer. So they're the first programmers. So my characters interact with them and, kind of get to do their part for the war and get to feel that superpower heroics. In book 2, they meet the code crackers. So we had Bletchley Park, happening in England during World War II that cracked the Enigma code. But facing west with Japan had its own secret machine, like an Enigma machine that was called Purple. So the code crackers were trying to work on that. And it was cracked by a woman, but she's just a little footnote in history. So she's a character in the book along with another amazing code cracker. There were women spies. So in book 2, we've got the code crackers and a spy. And then in book 3, I was fascinated with the pilots, the women who flew during World War II, because again, all the men were overseas fighting. And so they needed women to step in to fly. And they weren't allowed in combat, but they were allowed to fly all around the country in these planes, moving them from base to base. So they're in book 3. So I'm doing a terrible job doing a quick summary. So anyway, 3 girls discover they have superpowers, do all they can to protect their families, and at the same time work with these remarkable women of World War II. And the gist of it is that all of us have superpowers. We just, might not be wearing a cape.
I am. It's just under my shirt.
Yeah, you just can't see it. Me too. Mine's very small. So it was really fun to write and research.
It was something I didn't get into trouble for it, but a couple of times my teacher had to call home and let mom know that Robbie wore his cape under his clothes again today.
Oh, that's so great. That is awesome. I think everyone should, really.
Wow. Well, one of the I'm always looking at marketing for books because it interests me naturally, and I was really excited about the tagline for this is that it's Hidden Figures meets Wonder Woman, which I thought, yes, that is this book. What a beautiful encapsulation. So was that your initial pitch? Where along the
do you want to know what mine was? This is why I am not a highly paid professional. I am not a marketing person. Mine was, do you know Codename Verity? It's a YA book, and awesome. I give that book to people all the time. So Codename Verity is a World War II women pilot teenagers. So I called it Codename Verity meets the Powerpuff Girls. But somehow someone came up with Wonder Woman meets Hidden Figures. So I think they both work, but it's a lot of fun mixed in with some historical figures. So it's a mashup. And I did a ton of research into the early women superheroes, the early comic book heroes, because the whole thing came out of a question. I just was sitting around one day wondering, okay, what's up with Wonder Woman? She's kind of it. Like, if you ask most people, there are lots of people who know they're superheroes, but if you ask most people, name 3 female superheroes, I think a lot of people would be like, okay, there's Wonder Woman, and then it's like, so I was like, okay, who came before Wonder Woman? So I started looking into early comic book heroes, and there were a ton. They were awesome, and they had cool powers. So the girls in my book are mentored by, at first I was actually using public domain early comic book heroes from 1939 and 1940. And then right before we went to press, I started sweating, thinking, I'm just not comfortable using, even though it's public domain, I don't know if I have the right to use those names. So we went back through, I just told my editors, I'd prefer to just have my own characters. And so I tweaked all of the mentor 1930s and 40s characters. There's one for each book. And stepped away from using the original, but my 3 mentor superheroes are all based on some of these early ones. So it was really fun. All of this was just so much fun.
I try not to ask, where do you get your ideas? Because I know the authors don't actually know the answer to that most of the time. Yeah. But what was it that in your mind said, okay, well, code breakers, human computers, and superheroes, what was it that threw those 2 things together? Do you know?
Yeah, that's a question that works here, because as I'm kind of monkeying around reading about early Wonder Woman and like when she came on the scene, it was such a fun, like the history nerd in me was like having so much fun, because Wonder Woman came on the scene in December 1941, which is when Pearl Harbor happened. So immediately you have these 2 threads of female comic book heroes and our entry into the war. And within a couple months, so then I started reading this comic book expert named Trina Robbins, and then it turned out she was like coming through Chicago to give a lecture, and she wound up going out to coffee with me and talking to me about, and she actually drew Wonder Woman at one point in her career. So it's just fascinating comic book stuff and World War II stuff. So as I started thinking about where are the women on the comic book pages, I also was thinking, where are the women during the war? And, as a kid, everything in life is personal, right? The political is personal, everything. So for me, I remember 11-year-old me, because I'm writing basically for 11-year-olds. I'm still 11. So I remember 11-year-old me, like, thinking women didn't really do anything. We weren't like it's not the founding everybody. It's the founding fathers. Like, it's the dudes. The dudes did everything. The dudes went to war. The dudes signed important documents. The dudes wrote the documents. And
personally had and raised all the children themselves. Sure.
Right. So, so like, where are the ladies? But then, grown up me, as I'm reading these things, I'm like, oh, they were there. It's just nobody's telling their story. And so we can get to like the detective's assistant, which is, a detective book. We'll get to that. But as I started kind of down this path of writing for kids, it sort of dawned on me like, well, maybe I'll do this. Maybe I'll be the one that shines the little flashlight and says, hey, there's all these great, amazing men who were there, but look over here on the side, there were some women, or there were some people of color, or, some people who love differently or live differently. They were there too. It's just their stories haven't been told. And so looking at World War II, again, everything comes down to personal. I had heard about the ENIAC because my granddad worked on it. Our family is from Philadelphia. ENIAC was being built at University of Pennsylvania School of Engineering in their basement. My granddad my mom would tell a story that for a long stretch, my granddad wasn't at the dinner table during World War II, and they didn't know what it was until after the war that he was helping build this computer. And so it was kind of dancing in the back of my mind. But then as I started reading about World War II and what women were doing, I found it fascinating that these women that were coming out of college, brilliant women with a mathematics degree, their only prospects were to go teach like elementary math. And not to disparage any elementary math school teachers out there, but they had very few options. And so when the war happened, suddenly they did have options. So that kind of interested me, that with the ENIAC project, you had these women mathematicians that were jumping at the opportunity to do this stuff because no university would hire them, no company would hire them, just simply for their gender. It kind of thrilled me that, wow, they were able to step over and be part of something that just so significantly, like talk about a leap in, humankind, to enter into the computer age, that this machine was built and these 6 women were told, make it work, make it run. So they started doing this thing that became called programming, so I just thought, wow, I think people need to know who these people are. And when I watched a documentary about them, the documentarian said she learned about them because she was seeing these pictures of the ENIAC, and she kept saying, who are these women? And people would say, they're just refrigerator ladies. They're just women models. They're modeling. And the documentarian, her name is Kathy Kleiman, and if you just type in ENIAC project, you'll go straight. It's one of the first hits you'll get to look at her documentary. And she's like, I don't think they're models. I think they were doing something. And it turns out they were. So these women didn't get their recognition, for a very long time. So have I answered the question, or am I just...
Oh, yeah, no. You've just raised like 5 more, and I'm struggling to remember them all. I wanted to ask, one, when you've got characters like that history hasn't considered important, and you mentioned you're dealing with somebody who's a footnote in history, because that's history is sexist. Thank God it's over, right? Anyway, but when you've got somebody there's just not, where do you find the information you need, and how much do you have to two-parter? One, where do you find the information you need to flesh them out and talk about them? And 2, how much do you have to worry about being 100% representative of their reality when you've introduced something like superpowers into the mix?
Yeah.
So
I am almost always like doing this crazy dance, or whatever you want to call it, between pulling in the history and being true to the history, but writing fiction and being true to the fiction, in that for kids it needs to be interesting, engaging, and not like being spoon-fed vegetables, but so lots to answer with that. Okay. Number 1, what I try to do is go to the subject's words, their own words. And like with the detective's assistant, which was based around the time of the Civil War, that was very challenging. But with this era being World War II, and these women lived into their 80s. So I'm holding up my first book. This is Pioneer Programmer by Jean Jennings Bartik. So in CAPE, I talk about the ENIAC 6, but I really focus on 2 of those 6 women. One is Kay McNulty, because she's Irish, and I can get into that whole historical thing because I'm Irish. But Jean Jennings, man, I love this lady. And so if you go on YouTube, she's talking on YouTube. She's recording what it was like, being a part of this. She was just a gal from Missouri. She has this like Southern way of talking, but she has her own words here. So I just went through, there's highlighter all over this. I just looked at her spin on things. And then because to me, the super fun thing about history is showing kids that it's alive. So I reached out to her children and I messaged them with a crazy question. Hi, I'm this nutty children's author living in Chicago. I'm writing a book about superheroes, and I'd like to include your mom as a character. How would your mom feel? I don't want to disrespect her legacy or, make light of her contribution, but how would she feel walking around a book with a bunch of superhero girls? And both Jean's family and Kay's family were like, we're good with it. So so they told me about their moms and told me about their perspectives on things. And I said to them, if your moms could say something to young girls who might be interested in STEM, what would they say? And like Jean Jennings' kid said, she would say, you know, like engineering is fun, men play all day, don't let men have all the fun, you know, get in there. So it was really fun to kind of do the connective tissue to like, look, these were real people. And, you know, the world was changing at this moment. And here's, you know, how they helped it change. And you have that trajectory too. You can look at this and see, if I like math and puzzles, wow, maybe I can, you know, save the next election. Just kidding. But, you know, maybe there's a trajectory there for me, because they were just people just like me. So that's kind of my overarching goal in pulling historical figures in, because, you know, history for some people is a very dry thing of dates and battles. But if you think about it, that these were real life people at moments when humanity was changing, that's kind of cool. So
you just need the right teacher or the right author to humanize those characters and make them real for you, as opposed to names on a page.
Right.
But it has to be temptation, or temptation, where if you've got superpowers, why can't you have just one superpower person fly over, kill Hitler, and then that's it?
Right.
Let's keep going.
Right. So, and writing fantasy was a whole nother thing. Like, somebody was asking me how long it takes to do, you know, a book like this. And I'm easily 2 years into it, because not only was I trying to immerse myself in the ENIAC 6 and the ENIAC and just World War II in general, and comic book history, I was also, you know, trying to figure out everything else that was happening, and writing, scripting, graphic novel sections. Like, how do you write a graphic novel? You know, script, you know, sound effects, 6 panels a page, like all those things. It's a very slow process.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that. I want to ask you a little bit about everything, but let's talk a little bit about the comic book portions of this. How closely were you working with? Is it Patrick Spaziante?
Oh, Spaziante, yeah.
There we go.
He's a talented man. So we've never met, and he's not really a social media guy. So, for example, I'm holding up the cover right now for anybody who's watching this, but oh my God, the cover. Let's face it, we buy books based on covers, right? I mean, I think people will pick up a book if the cover is intriguing, and this cover is stinking gorgeous. So
it's very Action Comics #1.
Yeah. I mean, she's holding a car the same way Superman was when he made his debut. So there's the 3 characters. The color scheme is purple, green, and orange, as opposed to red, white, and blue. During World War II, there were a lot of patriotic colored superheroes, so I knew I wasn't going to go with that color route. But it's embossed. Like, I can run my finger over the word cape, and it's all gold and shiny and lifted. But this artist who did the cover is named Kelsey Eng, and she's on social media. So now we follow each other, and I'm like her biggest cheerleader, man. She is a talented woman. But Patrick, I would be doing the same, but he's not really on social media. I haven't found him. But oh my God, it was so exciting to see how he interpreted those chapters. So 4 chapters are graphic novel, and I'm holding up the pages again. I don't know that you can see any of these, but
those of you listening only, head to YouTube. You can see them, or better yet, just buy your copy of Cape. You don't want to miss it.
Go out and buy yourself a copy so you can see. 4 chapters are done in graphic novel, you know, comic book style, and that, if you believe it or not, it was not a gimmick to sell the book. It was in the writing. I had these scenes, these battle scenes, where I'm taking something that in my head is a comic book, and then I'm writing out the words for it in narrative form. And then it occurs to me, you know what? These really should be panels. So I wrote the book with 3 chapters as battle scenes in panels. And then when we went shopping it around, I said to my agent, I don't know who's going to get behind this. This is a little bit of a wacky beast that we're presenting. It's a middle grade novel of 60,000 words, but some of it, I wouldn't necessarily call it a full hybrid, because it's only 4 chapters, but at that time it was just 3. But Simon and Schuster, man, they well, I guess I can say this. They bought it in a, what do you call it? Preempt? I don't remember what you call it, where it's like if it's The Voice, they hit the button right away and said, we want this, don't talk to anybody else. So that was a thrill. That's never happened to me before. So this thing that I thought was so weird was actually good. So they came back to me and said, not just 3, let's open with panels to kind of signal that this is like comic book era, to give it the vintage feel. And I was like, great. So, you know, you write it as a script, or I don't know if anybody out there is thinking about doing a graphic novel. There's a lot of really good books on how to. I had, by coincidence, just signed with First Second to do a history comics about the Chicago fire. So I'd already been in communication with an editor at, I think First Second makes the best graphic novels. So I was already in a very nice conversation with a guy named Dave Roman, who's an editor there, who kind of pointed me to, this is how I like to see the manuscript when you're scripting. So I was like, okay. So I just devoured how to do that. And
is that Chicago Fire story coming soon where we could plug
June?
it?
It's coming June 2020. Yeah.
And what's the title of that one?
So First Second did something called Science Comics, and they came out with like 6 different ones, like about dogs or dinosaurs or I can't remember the other ones, volcanoes. They had really cool, just graphic novel, lots of information, pictures. So they're about to launch in 2020 a new series called History Comics. And so one of them is the Chicago Fire, and I got to do the Chicago Fire. So it's supposed to be June of 2020. So that was really fun. So I was, you know, working with him, which is how I kind of figured out how to write it. And so when we turned it in, you know, it was in the script form on those 3 chapters. They asked me to open with that. So I rejiggered, and then Patrick came on board, and all of a sudden they're like, here's your pages. This is what Patrick's doing. And I was like, it's awesome. So that is a thrill. That is a thrill to see how, because, you know, I have a very pointy little head, and I have all my little ideas in my pointy head. And then to see it come out, you know, and everybody out there who's writing, you know, it's a very solitary thing. You're in your little space with your little drink and your possibly dog or whatever. I have a dog who's my co-writer. And then, you know, you have to put it out in the world. So you show it to somebody or your critique group or your agent or whatever. And then when it gets to the point where an artist interprets what you've done, it's just so stinking thrilling. So
I assume you've got some experience from your picture books that would have prepared you for that.
Yeah, but this was different because, I don't know, graphic novels just feel so exciting to me. There's a level of dynamic energy, I think, that is in a graphic novel. And especially this, these girls are battling a giant demon serpent man, you know.
As one does.
In one of them, one of the characters, May, like kicks him in the throat or something like that. And I'm like, that's exciting. You know, all of us have a day where we'd like to kick evil in the throat. So it was very exciting to see Patrick's take on that.
I was, I just got to take it back because I'm a little bit of a control freak. It's my name on the book, and by the way, I love that you publicly admitted that you run your finger over your embossed name, because I always assume authors do that. I love hearing that you absolutely do it. Good for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my God, I'm 10 years old. Come on.
But what an amazing amount of trust, especially when I open the book, like, oh wow, we're going to start with the graphic novel because it's right there up front where you're setting the tone of the entire story. And
so
mission
accomplished.
If somebody doesn't like that, they might not get to chapter 2 where Kate starts. Although I suppose, I mean, it's your words within the graphic novel. What a tremendous amount of trust.
Yeah. Well, and that's something else that I think people need to hear. So I'll say, you know, from my very limited experience, I will say that, you know, your book is your book until it's not your book anymore. So the minute it's acquired, bought, owned by the publisher, this is a group effort. There are teams of people whose job it is to make your book sing, you know, like there is an entire art team that's going to do the visual conception. There is a marketing team. My first book got the title changed because a team of people said, we don't think anybody's going to be able to spell that right. So it's your baby to a certain degree, but at some point you have to recognize that there are many people involved in this process that you don't even know about. Like, I'm sure I'm not even thinking of, all of the hands that are on that. So I did have to sort of just step back and go, okay, Patrick's going to illustrate. So go for it, Patrick.
So how do you make your peace with that, with giving up that much control on lots of aspects?
Well, I have tried to do things on my own that are not my strong suit. And so to know that Patrick is a longtime illustrator in this field, I would go so far as to call him an expert. And so to have an expert doing this, I just have to trust the process and trust that this is a team that knows what they're doing. And again, I am part of even though it's my name on there, I'm part of a team. And yeah, I mean, now that you mention it, yes, it does take a lot of trust. It does, but also I certainly couldn't have illustrated that. So.
Well, let us pivot to a brief bone I have to pick with you from the text. Because at one point you have a character who I assume the character is speaking by proxy for the author, declare that Anne of Green Gables is the greatest redhead in all of literature. And I'm thinking, well, now, is this just because it's a sad time when there wasn't a Harry Potter series and the Weasleys didn't exist? Do you really feel that, or did you just feel that that's what the character would say?
Well, okay. Let's go. So as with everything in these historical writings, you have to look at what's available at the time, right? So I'm thinking I specifically don't say what year it is. It's just World War II era, because I don't want to trap myself in all of the dates of when such and such attack happened and this and that, because there is a little bit of war news happening in the background of all of this. And the ENIAC wasn't really revealed until the very end of the war. So I avoid dates, but roughly World War II era, we have no Weasleys. There's no Ron. There's no Jenny Weasley. So thinking about, to me, Anne of Green Gables, even though the Weasleys are on the scene, Anne's pretty great. So from my protagonist point of view, my red-haired protagonist point of view, there is no one better than Anne as far as redheads.
I just came across. I thought, that's a bold statement.
It is a bold statement.
Fighting words right there. It's like I think it's like chapter 5. It's early.
Yeah, it's a book cipher, and so I was trying to figure out what book cipher to use, and I was looking at what was popular at the time. So like Mr. Popper's Penguins, like stuff that people know about now. And then I was like, oh, but there's Anne, and Anne's a redhead. So, and Anne's a perennial favorite. I think there's a lot of love for Anne.
We're talking about the ciphers and the puzzles that they have to figure out. Of course, you as the author have to figure out all that stuff as well. So how much of your time did you spend just plotting out the puzzles ahead of time of the actual fiction?
So another of the great joys of writing is sitting alone in your room and laughing maniacally out loud when no one's around. I had so much fun with those puzzles because, again, back to like the personal, I grew up a newspaper family. Like nobody worked for newspapers, but I'm very lucky to have grown up in a family of readers. So my parents were always reading, and the newspaper was always on the kitchen table at breakfast. So some mornings I would look at the headlines and stuff, but mostly I would take the funny pages and do the puzzles all while eating breakfast and delaying having to go to school. So I grew up doing ciphers and stuff like that. My kids do Sudoku. I mean, I love puzzles. One of my favorite things is in Harry Potter when Tom Riddle's name is unscrambled, I love that stuff. So it just made sense that these girls, during World War II, there would be advertisements in the paper for different things. The mathematicians answered newspaper ads. So in plotting this, I'm thinking about 11-year-old girls who want to help because they have family members in the war. And the whole story, also another theme throughout, is who's powerful and who's powerless. And in society, who are the most powerless people? Well, girls. And we could look at, the dark issues in the news even now. Girls are powerless. And how does that feel growing up? Knowing like you can't go out for a run because you might get jumped, endless. So the idea of powerful, powerless is there. So how do these girls who want to do something, because dad's flying in the war as a pilot, another dad is driving an ambulance, another big brother is fighting in the 442nd, the Japanese regiment. What can they do? Well, they're great puzzlers. And there were the people who, joined Bletchley and some of these other, code cracking units started off answering ads for puzzling. So I thought, well, that's a great entry because all kids can puzzle. All of us can. All of us can do a cipher in the newspaper, unscramble letters and things like that. So that was a great entry point, thinking about 11-year-old me and how much I loved that. So I just went through, and I have to sustain this over 3 books. So I'm finding all sorts of puzzling, but it's been really fun digging up different puzzles and scrambling names and doing things that I had puzzles in a previous book. And most of the kids I've talked to on school visits and stuff found them at like not too easy, but not too hard. So
there's I don't know the name, but there was a woman who was jogging and got accosted earlier this week or last week, and she happened to be a UFC fighter, and so there's just photos of the would-be mugger and just how badly he's been beat up and rearranged.
Excellent. See, I hopefully with the book, I want girls to feel like that message of being vulnerable is not always the message. Like you can actually feel powerful, and you can feel like you can fight back and kick back. And I have a daughter and 2 sons, and at some point I realized, I had a daughter who was very sweet and didn't want to upset anything. And I had to actually say to her, you can yell no sometimes, you can yell, you can get mad. And, you don't always have to appease and be the nice person, because that's what the message we send to girls or whatever. I mean, not to get too heavy with the messaging, but part of this was thinking about, why do we love superheroes? Because they have power when we feel powerless. And during World War II, there were populations that felt powerless. And so
that's the theme of your work, right? Is women in history who are powerful role models.
Yeah. Trying to say that again, thinking back to, my limited perspective of history as a child, thinking, oh, the ladies didn't do anything. Like it's all dudes. Where are the ladies? And I remember having to fill out a form for summer camp, and it was, who's your idol? And or not idol, but role model or whatever. And I remember putting Johnny Carson.
Well, in all respect to Mr. Carson, he's an all right choice.
Yeah, but I remember just, I didn't have any ladies in my mind who were awesome. And even like as a parent, one of my kids had to dress up. I think this is common around the schools, like dress up as somebody from history, and a lot of times it's a president fair, and so the kids all dress up as a president. 50% of the class has no one to dress up as, right? So I'm hoping that one of the books I did about the first woman who was on the ballot for president, hopefully somebody could dress up as Belva Lockwood, because there were women, they were running, but no victories. Well,
in all fairness, a woman has been elected president. She just hasn't yet held the office. But that's politics, so we'll stay away from it.
Yeah, right. So, yeah.
Ooh, all right, anyway. Yeah, that's great. And the nice thing about that is talking about these strong women characters is it's right there in the concept. You don't need to scream. The difference is that wonderful scene in the Wonder Woman movie where she's coming across no man's land and she's defeating the army. You don't need to do the Captain Marvel thing and play I'm just a girl and go over the top with it. It's inherent. We get it. It's right there in the main concept. This is a strong character, and you can too.
Yeah. And also, sometimes I think as we're thinking about books and plotting and, what we want to write at the very outset, I sat for like a solid week thinking, okay, when you have 3 protagonists, it's usually 2 dudes and a girl, just like Harry Potter. And that's how you get, I think, isn't Rick Riordan the same thing, a girl and 2 guys? That's that's how you get your broad audience. And boys don't want to read girls is the common, thought, which I disagree with. But I sat here thinking, all right, should I do Two Guys and a Girl and just do all comic book heroes from the early days? And I was just like, no, I want this to be girls. And especially also circulating in my mind was how some of the action movies right now, when they were making board games, they weren't even making girl figures in the board games. Like Black Widow should have been in like the new Monopoly or whatever. And they weren't even making a girl figure. And I just thought, come on. So I feel like, the world can have a book where there's 3 girl superheroes, So I did not go with the prevailing wisdom of I could have probably a bigger marketing audience if there were some boys there. But I do feel like, and I did get asked this, maybe I shouldn't even say this. I got asked this on a school visit. A boy raised his hand and said, most of your books have girls. Why don't you have any, why aren't any of your books about boys? And the voice in my head answered, because all of recorded history has been boy. I'm pushing back against that. But I just said, I have 2 sons, so I've been thinking about some other books. And, I do have some books that are guy that hopefully I will sell. But right now, I feel like this is kind of the story. These are the stories I want to tell right now, just because I feel like, the world could use a few stories about some ladies doing some things. So I'm okay with it.
Look forward to a time when we don't have to have that as part of the conversation anymore. Why are there so many characters of color in the story as opposed to all of our stories have characters of color? All of our stories have women. It's not unusual. This one happens to star 3 women. This one happens to star a couple of boys, and we don't need to make a big deal about it. But we're not there yet. We probably won't be there within our lifetimes, but maybe our children or our children's children will live in that world.
Right. I have a coming out in the next couple of years. All these things are on slow trajectory.
You've got 8 in the pipeline, I think you told me.
I do have 8 in the pipeline. You did your homework. Yes, I do have 8 in the pipeline, and one that's coming is about a woman inventor. And I wrote that story because I was talking to somebody, and they said something about inventions, and I sat there and I thought, and I think I might have even asked it out loud to various people. Name one woman inventor. Can anybody name a woman inventor? It's hard. The Kevlar, the bulletproof fabric, that's a woman. Some people say Marie Curie, but it's hard to come up with a woman inventor. So I researched and came up with somebody and wrote a picture book biography about her. It's Josephine Cochran, who invented the dishwashing machine. But, I'm just trying to answer, fill in where the holes are in the Swiss cheese of history. So.
Yeah, no, that makes. But you know what? Let's. Have you got time to talk about the detective's assistant as well?
Sure.
Let me ask you 2 more questions about Kate, specifically about the nuts and bolts of marketing Kate, because I noticed you've got a fantastic curriculum guide at your site to help, I assume, teachers and students who want to utilize Cape and get their history in there along with the fun of superheroes. Who wrote that, and how does that help you in marketing the book? And how can authors listening go and do likewise?
Okay, so I do like the idea of being in a classroom and reaching kids with the history, and so I have been very lucky with some of these, with these books in connecting with teachers who are aspiring teachers, retired teachers, or current teachers, helping with the curriculum and classroom guides. So I just had put out the call on SCBWI for Illinois to, hey, does anybody do this? And I could use some help. And lots of people jumped at the offer because there's lots of teachers who are writing kids' books and have a great knowledge. So I connected with somebody named Christina. Her name is on there at the very last page, but Christina Moorhead, and she is amazing. And so we talked about, I talked about a little bit of what I was looking for and the discussion around these women mathematicians and that they're characters in the book, but they're real people. And there's a character in the book who is one of the first spies talked about during World War II, and he's considered, there's an entire adult biography about him. that he's the first hero of World War II because he was a Nazi double agent helping us. So trying to find like those nuggets that might be worthwhile in a classroom. So I feel like she just knocked it out of the park with that curriculum guide. I feel very happy about it. So hopefully teachers will, it's multi-page. I can't remember how many pages it is, but hopefully there will be something in there that a teacher might be excited about, doing in the classroom.
With something like that, do you need to run that by the team and get the publisher's approval, or is that something you could do just as a one-off on your own?
I did that on my own. I noticed that on the Simon & Schuster website, they do have some curriculum stuff for my book and a few others that could be used in the classroom. So they're definitely thinking about using it in the classroom too. But there are some things that, and I'm still not sure where the line is. There are some things that, you're responsible for as the author. It's kind of on you. Like I had to build my own website and I pay to maintain that and I do the editing of it. So if there's a bunch of stuff that's wrong on there, it's on me. So but then the publishing house also can be super supportive, in other things. So like, for example, I did a trailer and I paid for and found somebody to do the trailer. They're not willing to shovel out for those. But like, for example, right here, I have a bunch of nice bookmarks that they did and they're high quality and they sent these to me. And so they covered that expense. And so, there's things that they'll do and things that they won't do. But as far as curriculum, I just wanted to make sure and have a little bit of creative control over it, that it was on my website and as, accessible as possible for teachers to get to.
Have you, you might tell me to decline the answer and we'll move on, but have you encountered any morality clauses or any contracts you've come across so far?
Oh, yeah, like I have to behave myself. Yes, and I'm not going to post anything stupid on Twitter.
I mean, I assume that you.
I'll try to avoid them.
Anything that's going to get in this kind of conflict to keep you from doing anything you'd want to do anyway, right?
Yeah, I mean, I knew that was coming in one of my recent contracts that I signed. Like they kept saying, "Oh my gosh, this is delayed because of the morality clause." And I was like, what? But, contracts have been lost over these things. Like it's a new reality. And behavior that wasn't in the past accounted, there was no accountability for behavior. Now, who's going to be accountable if you're a crummy person, you or you're a book publisher? So, again, it gets back to play nice.
Do you mind sharing just a couple of general specifics? What kind of stuff are you not allowed to say on Twitter?
Oh, I don't think it got specific like that. I'm trying to remember what it said. It's been quite a while since it came across my desk. But, I think it's mostly like behavior at conferences, that you're not going to try to extract sexual favors for, mentorship. I don't think that's like clause number 3. I don't think it's like, written, but I think that maybe there was some misbehavior at conventions, and then who's responsible? The individual is responsible, but if you bring shame to the publishing house, be prepared that they might cut you, So I think they're just sort of expanding on that. Do I feel censored in any way? No, because my goal personally is not to act like that.
Sure.
So, but I mean, I do know.
We live in a world where there's always a couple of jerks that run it for the rest of us, because the vast majority of authors I've ever met have been wonderful people that wouldn't do that, whether you told them they couldn't or not.
Right. Yeah. It's kind of like that. This is why we can't have nice things, But yeah, so I have had a few friends who are like, I'm not going to sign a morality clause. They're not going to control me. But I think when it came down to it for me, I was like, I don't anticipate doing these things at a conference. I'm going to try not to post anything racist or deeply offensive on social media. And maybe we all should kind of keep that in check too, So I don't know.
As somebody who is never gonna, I try to avoid racism and sexism just in general.
See what I mean?
It's not a concern. I haven't been confronted with a morality cause, so I don't have strong feelings either way. I'm just curious to keep the conversation going and seeing where authors. But for the record, it's not a problem for you. You haven't come across anything that was
I have not felt censored or that my voice is, I don't feel like threatened in any way as a creative person. I just kind of felt like it was reaffirming that go forth and not be an ass.
You'd think that'd be easy, but for some people, it's just not.
It needs to be documented and signed. It needs to be wrapped in a legal bubble. Yeah.
Yeah, no names. We can't mention people who need that guideline. Let's see. Let's you know what? Let's you mentioned school visits, and I'm forever curious about tips for school visits. So, what does a Kate Hannigan school visit look like, and what tips do you have for authors who want to go and give great school visits as well?
Hilarious. So, okay, the first thing, like when I started thinking about doing author visits, I had 3 harsh audience members living in my house and eating at my dining room table. So my kids, would always be like, "Oh, don't be boring." And then one of my kids said, "You have to put a picture of our dog up there because every author that comes in always has a picture of their animal." I was like, "Oh, okay, I'll put in a picture of Bella, the Australian Shepherd." The way I look at school visits is, schools are strapped. And you are coming in and taking a day or some hours of their time. So I always want to be a value add. So I'm not in there to like flog selling my book. I'm in there to just talk about a love of reading, a love of writing, explain that I was not strong at either of those as a kid, and that nobody's great at anything when they start. And, for example, I use the Scroll of Doom to show, look, I was told no, and then here I am standing in front of you with a bunch of books. And I talk about, wasn't Michael Jordan cut from his high school basketball team? Like I try to give examples of nobody walks out there and is amazing. So your writing life that's beginning now in 3rd, 4th, 5th grade is just beginning. And your job is just to learn how to do it well. And how do you do that? You read the books that you're talking about in your classroom, and you mess around with writing, and you write as much as you can, and you eavesdrop. I tell them, eavesdrop. Come home with chunky words, and your parents will be amazed. Listen to words, write down words, look for editing. Like every time I go out to eat, I look at the menu and I look for all the typos because I'm a nerd. But and that no matter what you go into in life, there will always be storytellers. Somebody has to tell the story of it. So my husband does brain science, and he didn't like writing, but guess what you have to do when you're in brain science or in any kind of science? You have to tell the story of your science. You have to be able to write about it. So I just talk about, listening to family stories, listen to your teacher's stories, and, and read. I mean, I do beat the drum on reading because I live with Fortnite players who just want to be playing video games, and it's distressing like what we're up against as authors, so I am the antidote to they're going to go home and game. I'm like, go pick up a book. So I do try to be a value add and talk about writing and literacy, and a lot of times we do exercises on getting started, like and I read some of the best opening lines of middle grade, like Kate DiCamillo. If you're out there, listener, and you're still with us, some of the best opening lines, just talking about how you can kind of hook a reader, grab them by the collar, and just pull them into your book. And I think Kate DiCamillo for Because of Winn-Dixie has one of the best opening lines, where she just goes to the store and she names like 3 super ordinary things to get a bag of white rice, 2 tomatoes, and I came home with a dog. So it's like boring, bing, Charlotte's Web, how they're setting the table for breakfast, and Fern says, "Where's Papa going with that axe?" And it's like, how many of you guys had breakfast today? And the hands go up. How many of you guys had an axe at the table? So it's like imagery, how you can really pull people in by just simply laying one dangerous thing right there in the most ordinary circumstances, setting the table for breakfast. So
Well, if you're asking the kids who's got an axe at their breakfast table, somebody might get a call from CPS later.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a weed out question for the counselors in the audience.
That's another value added.
Another value add, exactly. But I try to be cognizant of the fact that teachers are, taxed to death with all the things they have to get done. For you to have the privilege to come into their classroom and talk directly to the kids, that it should be about something more than pushing product. It should be, let's talk about words. Let's talk about opening lines. Let's talk about why we read. Let's talk about how reading connects us. One of my favorite books that I talk about all the time is, oh my God, I just forgot the name of it. Oh, well, scrap it. I can't think of it.
I assume you were going to say Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees.
Exactly. Oh my God, I love this book so much. Why did I just blank on it? Anyway, it's a story about a girl whose dad has MS, and it's pre-internet, so it's set in the historical era of the 1980s. And she watches her dad lose use of his legs, and it sounds really depressing. It's The Meaning of Maggie. That's it. The Meaning of Maggie. And so she's kind of like, okay, well, what's going on with dad? So she's trying to figure out what MS is, and it sounds really depressing, but she's so funny. It's like so character driven. But we're in Maggie's house and we're seeing what's happening to her dad. And I read it with my son around the time of that ice bucket challenge where everybody's dumping water on their heads. And that was to raise money for, I think, ALS, which is not the same as MS, but both are neurodegenerative. And I just talked to kids about how I didn't have anybody in my life who was going through that, but I actually got to see by being at Maggie's kitchen table, I got to see what was happening and how hard that was and how hard it would be for any of us to watch someone we love so much, their health change. And so how we push through and still hold on to that person we love, and how we get through as a family. And I just thought it was so moving, but that's why we read, right? It takes us into somebody's kitchen where we wouldn't ordinarily be at the table. So.
Yeah, and in a way that no other medium, I think, quite can.
Yeah.
Other mediums are great at different things. Like I've never read a book that was able to successfully pull off a jump scare. That's strictly movie and video game territory.
Right.
But at the same time, what I always like to tell people is because it's a partnership between you and the reader. It's an act of hypnosis on your end when you're writing it, but then later when I'm reading it, it's a bit of hypnosis that I'm putting in my input, which is why no other medium will ever terrify as uniquely as a book, because It's all of you bringing in all of your neuroses into the horror story. The monster is part, that mean thing your dad said when you were a kid that you've never gotten over. And they can't pull that off in a movie version. It's got to be there in the book. What's a good length for a school visit where you're not losing the kids' interest?
Oh, that is such a good question, because I'm going at the end of the month down to St. Louis, and it's a whole new talk. Like I had to scrap the old talk and do a new talk because we're talking superheroes now. And
you sound like a comedian who just got rid of their hour and has to get a new one.
Yeah, so I am a little stressed about it. Like I like school visits, but man, kids are a tough audience because if they are not interested, it. It's like palpable. And then you just feel like a comedian on stage just dying. So I live in fear of school visits, but I like them, because it is really fun to get out of my, one person little office and interact with readers and see how things are playing. But I think 45 is a good length, and do those last 10 minutes or so with questions. And then I find that the way you say, who has a question, you might get crickets. But when you say, now, ask me your questions, or my thing is, because the detective's assistant has people dressed up in costumes, I would bring false mustaches, and I would say, if you have a question, you get a false mustache. And then the room, everybody shoots their hand in the room. So I'm not above bribery for enthusiasm, but so I try to bring stuff, but the mustaches have gone over well. I don't know, maybe I'll bring masks. I should really think about this, what I'm going to bring for the question and answer. But
I assume you want to steer clear of candy because of allergens and.
Yeah, you never know who's got a horrible allergy to something, and something novelty that they might not have. Like nobody has false mustaches, so they smack them on and walk out of the visit, with a whee. So that's always fun. But yeah, so I do about 45 minutes of a talk, leave the last 10 of that 45. So it's a 35-minute talk. And I do Google Slides so that I don't have to carry all sorts of laptop and all that. If you do the setup where they have their school computer that's already within the firewall of the school, you just go in there, log into your Google account and call up your Google slideshow, and boom, it's on the screen. So there's not a lot of, because actually the physical stress to me of a computer, a technology malfunction can almost be paralyzing. So I used to bring my laptop with the special little cord that would connect to the projector and then hope that the projector worked and all this. But if I just use their equipment that's rigged up and ready to go, log in to my Google account, my Google Slides are there, boom, call it up, we're off and running. So that eliminates that level of, where's my thumb drive? Where's my laptop? And then I try to talk about things I think they're learning, which is maybe the 6 traits of, creative writing, or like I said before, starting strong, like an opening line that's just going to reach out of the pages and grab you in. Or sometimes I play a game show where I boil down a book to one sentence and see who knows it. And hands shoot up. So there's a little social cachet for the kids who know all the answers. So yeah.
I assume that at some point you want to mention the book. You don't want them to go home and say, this nice lady with fake mustaches came in. She was the mustache lady. I assume at some point you want them to know that you're Kate Hannigan, author of books that are available that they can purchase. When
I talk about writing things that come up, I talk about the things I wrestle with, like finding the right word, and I might read a passage, a little bit from the book or something. And I'll definitely have pictures of the book up there that this is what I go through when I was writing this is what was in my mind, so that they do, make a connection. And also that scroll of doom led somewhere, and I try to point where it led. But, what's really fun is on page 6 of The Detective's Assistant, I always read, I always tell them the dark underbelly of children's lit, which is authors all across the country right now are trying to figure out how to get rid of the parents, so like, and they always know the Home Alone reference, like Home Alone, where did those parents go? They went on a trip. Where are Harry Potter's parents? Just getting the parents out of the way so that the kids go through it. And then a lot of them are like, oh yeah. So I'm like, so children's authors aren't mean. They're just trying to get the parents out of the way. They're trying to find the most expedient way to do that. And so for me on page 6, I always read page 6 because in one page, I kill off everyone in this poor child's family. And it's kind of like my spoof of children's books. But so I just try to do a little, talking generally about writing, the writing life, the reading life, the role of reading, and reinforce a teacher's message on all of those things, and reflect it back onto what I go through, so that they recognize that the torture they're being put through to be a writer at their age is something that they'll continue the rest of their life through that pain. But that it's, that everybody who's writing is trying to do those things, trying to get those things on the page, a better word. Often I have a picture, well, I don't know if it's in the new one or not, I don't think I moved it over, but of people moving through a park, a picture of people being really goofy in a park, and I say, let's get them across the park, and we can just say, they blank across the park, and I say, we can say walked, but what's a more exciting word? And then the kids, raise their hands, and so we just talk about language and using engaging, interesting language as opposed to the expected.
Gotcha. I don't keep the focus on the value added, on talking about general subjects, but you do work the book in there at some point, at least once.
Definitely. Because as someone once said to me, we're always selling.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's true even for people who don't write books. Everybody's a salesperson, but I'm a little cynical that way in my view of the world. Well, you've given me 2 absolutely excellent segues to The Detective's Assistant. Obviously, my next question for you is, Kate Hannigan, have you ever seen a flying saucer, and do you believe in them?
I do believe. Have not. Usually there's a reason. But why couldn't there be life out there? I feel like it's awfully egocentric to think we're the only ones. So...
Was there a possibility we might see some Foo Fighters in the coming sequels to Kate?
I can't make any promises, but
I'm telling you, history gets really interesting when you add flying saucers.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Okay, well let's talk about the detective's assistant. So once I'm going to ask you to give esteemed audience just kind of an overview of what is this book about.
And I think the first time you asked me to do that, I just rambled for 5 solid minutes. So I'll keep this short. So holding up the cover of The Detective's Assistant, it is about an 11-year-old girl dumped on the doorstep of her aunt's home or boarding house. And the aunt turns out to be Kate Warne, America's first woman detective. She was hired by the Pinkertons in 1856. She walked into Alan Pinkerton's office for a job, and he assumed she was there for a secretary position, but she used a great word. Another example of using a really good word. She said, "I can worm out the secrets from the wives and girlfriends of the crooks and criminals." And Alan Pinkerton said, "I'm a progressive man. We live in a progressive time." And he hired her, and she became one of his finest detectives. So he wrote about her and another detective named Timothy Webster as his 2 finest detectives. And I was working on a totally other story when I came across that little nugget about Pinkerton saying how he hired her in 1856. I had another historical story set in 1856, and I dumped it, and I wrote Detective's Assistant like a pack of wolves were on my heels, because I realized, oh my God, she's awesome, and if I found her, I might not be alone. And sure enough, there's a few other Kate Warne books out right now, but it was so stinking fun. Because she was awesome. So various things, and I won't do the whole brain dump on you now, but nobody knew of her. Like, I asked a bunch of my friends, have you ever heard of Kate Warne? No. And so as I dug up, there wasn't a lot of history. There's no history of her before she walked into Alan Pinkerton's office. So as a fiction writer, that's awesome. But a lot of historians wrote her off. She was dismissed despite having thwarted a plot to assassinate Abraham Lincoln. She was not even a historical asterisk. She was just gone from the history. So as I read a bunch of biography, historical writing, most of the historians said the same thing. She must have been Pinkerton's lover. And I was like, I've seen a picture of Pinkerton. Why? So I'm like a little doubting of this. And so the big explanation I could find is the historians would say she must be his lover because she's buried near him in Chicago's Graceland Cemetery. So I was like, I'm in Chicago. I can go to Graceland Cemetery. I'll go look for myself. And I get there, and there's this great obelisk to Pinkerton and his family and his wife and his kids, and everybody's buried around there. And then off to the right are some beautiful old moss-covered tombstones. And Kate Warne is there, but also Timothy Webster, and also George Bangs, and some of his other operatives. And I thought, well, they can't all be his lover, can they? Do we make that assumption? So then I thought,
you never know. Pinkerton might have been a particularly prolific fellow, as they say.
He's a player. So if you work from the assumption that maybe she wasn't his lover and maybe she was just this detective, but at the time, I think when you look back on things historically, you can see it's just a lack of imagination. Before Obama was elected, most people would say America can't have a black president. Just like we might say now, America can't have a gay president. America can't have a woman president. Like, it's just a lack of imagination that it could ever happen.
I don't think we're going to have presidents anymore, but that's just me. I think we were about going to have to wind down this experiment, try another form. But that's moving away from history.
That's a later discussion. So I just thought, well, what if we actually thought of her as maybe she was a good detective the way Pinkerton wrote that she was. So all Pinkerton's accounts of her helping with these cases were written with great esteem. Like, he thought of her so highly that she was the head of his female force. He began hiring other women and put her in charge. She helped thwart. There were 2 people that rode the train bringing Lincoln through Baltimore, Alan Pinkerton and Kate Warne. And then she had to get off the train in Baltimore because they thought the decorum of the day, it would have been unsavory to have the president arrive in D.C. in the company of a woman that wasn't his wife. So she did have to get off there. But so I just thought, well, what if we look at her through the eyes of maybe she was a respectable detective who was smart and competent, and people just were flipping out that she was a woman. So I wrote this with the idea that this girl, Nell, is 11. She gets dumped on Kate Warne's doorstep, and I just set up a train wreck of Kate Warne has this great job. The first time, a woman doing a man's job in a man's world. The last thing she wants is a kid. And the kid, I just killed off everybody in her family. So all she's got is Kate Warne, and all she wants is a sense of belonging. And so the train wreck is set up. So it was really fun to write. So that's what that's about.
You keep pulling your hair out sometimes when you read these idiot historians. Oh my God, a woman must have been related to a man somehow.
Yeah, that's just the way it's been viewed. And it is kind of amusing because one of these, I think I'm looking just past the computer to a shelf, and I think I have the guy. Maybe I trashed it, but one historian, fairly recent, wrote about the Pinkerton, all the research around the Baltimore plot is what it's called. So it's an attempt to kill Lincoln on his way to his inauguration to start off the presidency. It's not 1865, it's 1861. And one historian wrote about, so Pinkerton had a code name for the big moment when they escort Lincoln. And so Pinkerton's name was Plums, was his code name. Lincoln was Nuts, and Kate Warne was Mrs. Barley. So she, in a lot of the reports on the case, there's an, it'll say the account, like a detail of the account, and it'll be credited to MB. MB was Mrs. Barley. And one of the historians was like, and I had seen it verified elsewhere, but in this historian's account, he said, "We'll never know who MB was." And I'm like, it's the chick. It's the chick. You're just not thinking of her. So
I like that they have to have a code name if there's only one woman. I would think that would be deciphered.
Who would they confuse it with? So it was a thrill to research. I would still be on it if I could. In my mind, I was thinking that was book 1 leading up to Lincoln's inauguration. Book 2 was the war, and book 3 was assassination. But my editor was like, "Meh, I don't like series. I just like a one-off." And I was like, "What?" So.
Well, it's worked out. It's the book is beloved, if we can say that. It's won multiple awards. It's graced many bestseller lists. In fact, that was a question I wanted to make sure I asked you about. Is when Jennifer was here last episode, we asked her what her experience was like of the detective's assistant winning the Golden Kite Award and all of the other prestige that it's garnered. What is your experience? What's the author's perspective on that? Let us live vicariously through you.
Oh my goodness. So, okay, anybody who watches the Academy Awards, come on, like we all have our little speech. Like I would never forget to thank my spouse or whatever. Those moments, I have low expectation. Like generally my life policy is, don't bring shame to the family. But so the book came out. I agonized over whether critics were going to say adheres too closely to Pinkerton's accounts and is boring versus people saying plays around too much with history, is not worth reading. Like I was agonizing with it. And then I think this must have been 2016 when I got the call or something, but it was election time and we were getting a lot of robocalls and different, campaign calls. And my son took the call and he almost hung up on them when the committee called. Like you get that great phone call. The committee calls to say, "You've won." So my son gets on the phone and I think he's given them the bum's rush to get off. Like this must be a political call. And finally they get through to my son to say, "Go get your mom." So when I heard it, it took me a minute because I'm thinking, is this like a Hillary Clinton campaign call or is this what is this? What am I getting here? So it was a thrill. And everybody in life wants validation, so that was a little bit of a shot in the arm to say, keep at it, and that's what made me think I love this idea of digging up people from history and kind of shining a new light on them. So it was a thrill.
Now that when you're facing the blank page, and you remember that, hey, I'm 2016's Golden Kite Award winner.
Well, I will say, those 8 years, how it is when you're plugging away, and you go to a dinner party and somebody says, "Oh, and what do you do?" And you say, "Well, I'm a writer." "What have you written that I would know?" "Nothing." So now at least I think there's a Wikipedia entry that says Golden Kite Awards, and it has, so it's a little less excruciating at dinner parties.
Now these days I just say I'm a podcaster and people go, and then they walk away. That's the end of the conversation.
Podcast is,
Hi, internet. Okay. So
keep them guessing. Always throw them
We
off.
are rapidly running out of time, unfortunately, because I talked to you all day.
Oh, this was great.
I definitely want to ask you about movie options for the detective's assistant. I know that I think you said that you've been contacted 3 times. So what's that experience, and how soon can we all look forward to seeing the detectives?
Oh man, oh man, oh man. So many things going through my mind. So number one, I have heard many times that producers do not want period pieces because they're expensive to do all that costuming and trains from the 1860s and things like that. But just the other day, I saw the ad for Little Women with all the like star-studded, Emma Watson and everybody's in that thing. And I was looking at that and I'm like, oh, that's World War II era. So I'm hoping, not World War II, excuse me, Civil War era. So I'm hoping we're going to see like a resurgence of World War II historical pieces, and then we'll be off and running. But
I saw that trailer and I was like, oh, thank God, finally a film version of Little Women.
Exactly. It's like 5 minutes ago. Didn't we just have somebody do that?
But then they said Meryl Streep, and I said, okay, fine, take my money.
Exactly. That was it too. I'm all over Big Little Lies for the same reason. I'm like, what's Meryl doing? I'm there. So right after The Detective's Assistant came out in April 15, I think, I got contacted by a producer in Chicago who had made movies and said he'd come across The Detective's Assistant ages ago, loved it, and let's do this thing. And so I went with him, and for a little while we did like a year-long dance, and then Johnny Depp. This was a thrill. Johnny Depp's production company. Somebody got in touch with me from that, and I remember like the email came across. And he's like, I read The Detective's Assistant. I'm really interested in doing something. Can we talk? And I remember taking the email to my husband and showing him my phone and saying, am I being punked? Like, this has got to be like my brother or my sister. Someone is punking me.
Is this somebody from the production company, or is this Johnny Depp?
That was from Johnny Depp's production company. Okay. And so I was actually going out to, so here's my sticker. I was going out to LA to collect my sticker and collect the award at SCBWI for the Golden Kite. And so they said, come by the, studio. And it was top secret. Like, it was a nondescript building in the back, no numbers on the building. We just had to deduce where it was, and we wandered upstairs. So anyway, we found it. So this is before everything shut down. Johnny Depp, his life changed, and he cut the production company, but he'd made a lot of movies. I think he did Hugo Cabret. Like, he likes, they were readers. Like, I got to tour the place, and there was an entire room full of bookshelves, kid lit, adult lit. I mean, they were readers. And so I got to sit at a table with Johnny Depp's sister, who looks just like Johnny Depp, and a couple people who had read the book, and they were like, let's talk. And I was like, it was such an out-of-body experience. If you can imagine that happening to you, that is exactly how I was. I just sort of stared dumbfoundedly at everyone and sort of, mentally was up in the corner of the room watching down at the large wood table where it was happening. But, and then, that production company was shut down. And then just recently I got another cold call random. I was looking at Facebook like the night of my kid's graduation from 8th grade. We all came home after dinner and we're all just vegging. So I pick up my phone and I look at Facebook, and somebody, and you get friend requests. I got a friend request from this person, and usually I look to see if they have a book background, if they're involved in books, and that makes sense why someone I don't know might want to friend me on Facebook. And I almost hit no because I didn't see any book connection, and I was just going through it fast. And then I thought, it won't hurt me to say yes. So I said yes. And then within a second, she DM'd me and said, I'm obsessed with The Detective's Assistant. Let's talk about making a movie. And I was like, bing! So I don't know. There's a lot of talk. I think it fits a lot of the zeitgeist right now of, capable woman doing the best she can. And,
Do you have an ideal actress in mind?
Well, I love Jennifer Lawrence, but you know who I also love is Melissa McCarthy. She could do it.
Sure.
Really funny. She's really funny, but you know, it's really fun to think about. But I think there's a lot of talk, so we'll see. I would not be. I mean, even if it were cartoon characters, I'd be fine with anything. So I just think it's really cool that people are interested in Kate Warne. So, and I've actually been to the cemetery and touched that gravestone of hers. Sometimes we had to go to a funeral recently, and we were in that cemetery, and I went over and did my visit to her because, these are real people from history, and I felt like she didn't get, her story wasn't appreciated when she was alive, and so I feel like if I can do some small part to sort of resurrect that story, and share it with a new generation, then I think that's something.
And at this point, as a Golden Kite Award winner, you owe her, at the very least, a little bit of deference and respect when you walk by her grave, I would think.
Sure. Absolutely.
Oh, Kate, I have so many more questions, and I have to go to the bus and get my son off of it here shortly. So we gotta call it. So in lieu of all the questions that I've somehow over the course of 2 hours run out of time to ask you, let me sum it up with this one.
Yeah.
If there was, for all the authors and would-be authors listening, there was one bit of advice somebody could have told you early on in your writing career that would have made things much better for you, that would have made a huge difference, what would that have been? What would you want them to hear?
I have exactly the moment when it turned for me. Take yourself seriously as a writer. I was just throwing stuff, just following my bliss and doing things and almost self-sabotaging, because if I didn't try too hard, then it was okay when I was rejected because, hey, I didn't try that hard, or for years in a critique group. And then one day I did something, and one of my critique partners looked at me and she said, why don't you take yourself more seriously as a writer? Like, you could do something here. And I thought, I think she just shot straight to my psyche, like, stop with the whatever deep-seated self-defense that is, and like, give it your all. And I realized at that point, yeah, what happens if I give it my all, make myself incredibly vulnerable by trying my heart out? And that is when I wrote the first novel that was sold. So take yourself seriously as a writer. If this is what you want to do it with all your heart and see what happens.
Absolutely outstanding advice. Kate, where can esteemed audience find you online and stalk you and buy all your books?
Oh, sure. KateHannigan.com.
And are you on Twitter?
Oh, yes. So on Twitter, it's Kate Chicago. I like to make it really confusing. Kate Chicago on Twitter. On Instagram, it's Kate Hannigan Books. And then... I was just saying...
Audience, absolutely.
Facebook is just one of many Kate Hannigans, so feel free to friend all 10 of us.
Sure, you could always use more friends. One the Kate Hannigan and 9 new strangers that will hopefully also be wonderful friends. Yeah. And as always, esteemed audience, you can find me at middlegradeninja.com. Make sure you find your way back here Friday when we're chatting with Alan Woodrow about Curse of the Werepenguin. Don't forget to download your free copy of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees, and or the Book of David, Chapter 1 or both. They're free. Go nuts. Kate, I have thanks again for making the time to do this. Just absolutely wonderful conversation.
Thank you. This was a blast. Thanks for yakking.
I'm going to be going back and listen to this with a pad of paper and a pen. Like, what did she say again? Okay, I'm going to write that down. That's a good note. And then I'm going to steal it the next time I'm at a conference and somebody says, say something brilliant. I'll be like, what did Kate Hannigan say? Like, yes.
I'd help you.
Kate, I've been asking all of our guests to sign us off, and our sign-off phrase is hi-ya and what have you. Will you sign us off?
Hi-ya and what have you.